everyone, welcome to Naveen Connect, the place where spirituality meets the messy but beautiful reality of being human. We're your hosts, Jean and Humphrey. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I thought was quite interesting. So we were doing the research for our December episode, and I found that between 55 to 61% of Americans say they feel more lonely during the holiday season. So I thought that was interesting because you would think that that's not the case from all the imagery and things that we see, that we think that, during the holidays, we're getting together with our families and we're seeing our friends more.
I know, Gene, right? It's pretty crazy statistic that does happen. But then I guess if you think about it, most people, because most people spend time with the families, if you are someone that feels lonely or are kind of thinking about that, I could see how it feel you feel it more during the time, because it's kind of more like a comparison point. You see everybody going out and you're not, or so if you don't have a lot of friends or you don't have a lot of family that you get to connect to, I could see like something like that would hide that factor.
Well, I think
Right?
it's important for us to first start and talk about what loneliness is, right? Because I think you can also be around people but still feel alone.
Yeah, it's a good point. So why don't we start
So,
with that?
okay, let's start with that. So, what is loneliness?
Well, let's start with the actual definition, right? We can say loneliness is a subjective feeling of disconnection, right? Even when you're surrounded by people. Translation that even when you're within a group of friends, you feel alone. Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, by the definition, it says that's not just about the number of relationships, right? But more of the quality that you have, which I take it to be more of a emotional connection.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Some say, I think that like if you have, it's kind of like if you have different expectations of what the quality of your relationship should be, like between like, oh, I feel like I should be closer to my parents or closer to my siblings, and then you feel like you're not, then when you're around them, you feel that disconnect or that separation, and then
Yeah.
that makes you feel lonely. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you think about it, there's people that that have, well, I think we all know people that say they may feel lonely, but they're always surrounded by other people. So clearly it's not a number of people issue. It's more of a connection type of
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, I feel like loneliness feels different as you age.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because I
so
think like,
what do we know about that? Is there any kind of data into, is that a thing? Are there ranges of ages where loneliness fluctuates?
I mean, I was thinking in preparation for this episode, I was thinking about my own milestones in life and kind of where I felt more lonely
Mm-hmm.
and where I didn't. I definitely, there's a couple of key areas that I can point out, which is, I think, like young adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
So like you're coming out of high school or you're maybe senior year of high school to like when you're in college, right? I think when you're building out like who you are in the world outside of, I guess, the influences of other people, and you're really kind of figuring out who you are,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that time could be very, very lonely because you don't necessarily feel like anybody understands you or understands what you're going through. And we're talking about disconnection from relationships and other people. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
at that point, you're building your own, you're building an identity for yourself. And I think you
Mm,
almost feel disconnected from the identity that you knew of yourself up until then.
got it. Yeah.
So for me, it was very much, I mean, that was when I was going to church, when I was, working and meeting new people, but you're all of a sudden kind of in a place where you're trying to think about, what do you believe?
Hmm.
What do you think, all on your own, outside of influences that you had up to that part? And so,
Right.
um, for me, during that time, I felt not only like very alone, but not at peace.
Mm.
Like trying to figure out, where I fit in the world was really hard for me to do at that point,
Yeah.
because you only have so many experiences to really draw upon.
Right.
And then I think the other time or milestone in my life where I felt really alone was when and Humphrey, you know this, I had 3 surgeries in 1 year for my feet.
I
And
remember those days. Yeah.
and that was probably one of the hardest times of my life, because not only are you physically in pain, but you also, again, are detached from the identity of who you were before the
Right.
surgery, right? Like mobile, working out, et cetera, to immobile, in a lot of pain, and no one could really understand the pain that
Mm.
you're going through or the disconnect that you're feeling. And so for me, I think those are the two main areas where I felt loneliness,
Hmm.
right? In a negative way, I guess, because I think there's also, a way of being separated from people that can be very reflective and refreshing. And, you kind of also need it to recharge.
No, I that those make sense, and it jives with kind of like some of the research that we found. In preparation for today, I did this an exercise of thinking why times in my life that I feel that, and I didn't go through your experience of transition time in college, kind of going to college, kind of that age group. I didn't do it, but so the first time I actually had a feeling of loneliness was when I was about 24. I was in Chicago and I actually got chickenpox in the middle of Christmas. So I couldn't travel to my family. So I felt isolated. So I couldn't leave my apartment. I couldn't talk to anyone. So it was literally the first time that I ever felt that feeling of isolation. Um, and but it was short lived, right? It was a short time.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when I was in my 40s, when I went through my divorce, that was a much longer time frame, and that was a an identity crisis for me. So the feeling of loneliness created an identity crisis for me,
Okay.
because it made me question who I was, whether I had failed in my life. Who am I? It turned into literally an identity crisis. Who am I as a person? Kind of scenario, and that made me feel uh, loneliness, but in a more of a deeper soul kind of way, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes any sense.
But then, I mean, so this goes into kind of what we kind of discover within ourselves, which is loneliness starts out feeling kind of isolated or an emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a part where you're kind of like pushing through it, right? And it gives you it gives you some self awareness or some type of knowledge to get you to understand the circumstances that brought down the loneliness, no?
Yeah, it's like a catalyst to make you do some work to dig in and figure out why you're feeling that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, loneliness, when you are talking about it initially, there's always like this negative connotation to it.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you really start thinking about it and looking at it from the perspective of like the catalyst point of view, it ends up being a stimuli or something to help you for it to be good, right? And I think the difference is loneliness turns into solitude, solitude turns into perspective, or kind of a reflection period where you get to know yourself a little bit better.
So then the question is that is loneliness kind of like a trigger, like a, like a notice that you go
Yeah.
through some periods of time that you become lonely to force you to go through those?
I mean, I think about if we all kind of, even people that are listening, if we think back and we reflect to the moments that we felt lonely
Mm-hmm.
in our history, and then we think about what we've learned from that period, then isn't it a trigger or like a sign?
Well, okay, so let's use us, or let's use our experience.
Yeah.
So when you were going through those two situations, when you had the leg, and then when you were in your young, before when you were young, do you feel that helped? Like there was a shift, and if it was, what do you feel it was that shift for you?
I mean, I definitely think that you can stay in loneliness for a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes introspection and for you to ask yourself like the hard questions, in order to get out of the loneliness part and into kind of self-discovery part. But you could definitely, if you're, avoidant, uh, and the reason I say that is because when I was younger, I was very avoidant, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a avoidant personality in which I didn't necessarily want to deal with things. I would cling on to maybe like bad relationships or other things to distract me.
Yeah,
And so I stayed in the loneliness for a lot longer because I didn't want to confront it.
got it,
And
got it.
then I think life or a higher power ends up removing all the distractions in your life. At least that's how I see it. And then it forced me to kind of confront the things I didn't want to confront about myself or the circumstances in which my decisions had put me in because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of what I decided to do or the choices
Yeah,
that I made. And then once I did do that, which was really painful, right? Because you have to come and you have to peel back all the layers of what you did, things that you don't necessarily like about yourself, and then and then and then kind of move forward with accepting it for one, and then deciding, hey, these are the choices that I made before, turning the page, and then kind of making other decisions and learning from your mistakes. And
right.
I think the more you do that, slowly you get out of loneliness and you get into more kind of a place where you go into solitude on purpose to kind of do the habit of like kind of processing everything, making better decisions and kind of moving forward.
That's interesting you say that, Gene, because I think so. I agree with you 100%. First of all, because especially if I look at the time from my divorce and all that loneliness that I went through, what you mentioned is I felt the same thing, which is it forced me to deal with things that I didn't want to deal with.
Yeah.
And you can only do it when you're on your own. You have no choice but to look at yourself and figure out those things. But interesting enough, most spiritual traditions have some sort of concept of that type of work, right? Of like the only way to do that is on your own. Like being lonely forces you inside.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is it's interesting the timings of just using our scenario as an example when they happen. You say most people happen when they're young or in midlife. In the other third part is when people are older, because those are major life transitions, right? Major transition points in life.
Yeah.
And I wonder aloud, here with our listeners, is that part of the path? Like it's just moments in time where you're more in tune to do that work, or you're in a better position to that work. For me, for sure, and I gotta say, I was not in a position to do the work I did up to that point. And it was only because it was forced. I'll be honest with everybody listening. It was because I was forced. I had no other choice
I mean,
but to
as
do
I'm
that
sitting here,
work.
I'm coming with the revelation of like, I feel like from I'm realizing now that the more that I elude, the more you try to elude loneliness, right? And loneliness is really a sign of, hey, you need to do some processing and reflection on yourself, right? Because you feel disconnected, right? Whether that's from yourself or from the people around you, there's a disconnection, right? And the more you try to run away from it, the more you feel disconnected. So that loneliness grows more and more and more. That, and then it kind of forces you to
Right.
like, I have to dig in because it's just getting worse.
But let me ask you a question. Is that because now that we're talking this going deep, is that because you is the feeling of loneliness because you feel no connection, or because you're afraid of the I'm wondering if psychological, because we don't want to deal with ourselves, right? Like, so
I think it could be
I don't
both.
like me, or I don't like what I need to deal with, so I don't like to be alone. Really, like I wonder if that is the process.
I think it could be both. I think it could be both. Like, I feel disconnected from people, but I also don't like the process. So I feel like I need to find some distractions or whatever. But those distractions aren't actually going to make you feel any less unlonely, if there's a term for that, and, or
Yeah,
connected. And then because you don't feel connected, you feel even more alone, right? So it amplifies it
right.
until you deal with it,
Yeah,
until you find connection. Even the action of avoiding connection is going to feel even more disconnected.
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like loneliness itself is just, like you said, a trigger or a sign. And then the good part of loneliness is solitude, right? Where you get to the part where you start doing the work and you start really looking at yourself and seeing all the good stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff. And then there's the stuff that I don't think it's bad stuff. I think it's stuff that you need to adjust and make better.
Okay. So, so one of the things that okay, so on that line that we're going, so do you think those signs or the things that are happening, is that always that something that you need to work on, or is it maybe just like, hey, I got to evolve to a particular point, maybe on a spiritual path, and I need some time alone? Like, is it always a, hey, you need to work on something and that's why you feel lonely, or is it maybe something, could it be both?
I think that depends on where you are in your life. I think that could be true when you're younger.
Yeah.
Or, and I shouldn't say, maybe we shouldn't put ages on it. I really think it's milestones in life. And
Okay.
like, and everyone kind of goes through milestones differently at different
Yeah.
ages,
I
right?
agree 100%.
I think the first time when you feel that really deep loneliness, I think that can be true. Where,
Mm-hmm.
but I think as you evolve, um, and you learn more about yourself, right? I really feel like, wait, what was the question?
Whether loneliness is something that is always a trigger for something for you to work on, or if or if it's more of a sign of evolution, like, hey, I'm evolving spiritually, so
Yeah, yeah. I think in your midlife, I think you're more, you don't need the trigger of loneliness to tell you that you need time to reflect or process. I think you've built enough skill sets to identify when you need to kind of take solitude time away. But I also feel like from a personality expected perspective, like taking time away means different for different people, right? Whether you're introverted or extroverted, your processing ways are very different.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, so I have to say I agree with you on that. And so if we think of loneliness, so when I think of loneliness, I've always think of, let's call it good or bad loneliness, meaning
Well, let's call
if
it
it,
loneliness versus solitude.
okay, great. Loneliness versus solitude. So what is the difference between loneliness and solitude? Or
I
how we
think
define that?
I think loneliness, for me, loneliness breaks you down and
Okay.
solitude lifts you up. So
Okay.
the way that I see it is loneliness makes you feel disconnected, makes you feel all those negative feelings, isolated, disconnected, all these things. And solitude actually gives you, builds you up. It gives you time to reflect, to recharge, to refresh, and to do all these things, right? So that's how I see it.
Okay. So would it be safe to say loneliness is something that it just things happen that you make you feel lonely, like maybe a trigger or something or a sign, and then solitude is maybe something you choose to
Yeah,
do?
for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Um,
It's interesting because I can relate to that, right? Because after my loneliness period, I actually chose solitude. When I found yoga and I started doing yoga and get into meditation and things like that, I actually chose to be like to go on walks and do things on my own
yeah,
because but it was choice.
yeah.
It wasn't like nobody would. It's actually, and I was very happy. But so it was like transition from loneliness to choosing solitude. I would call
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So I think one of the things that I thought was interesting is the different perspectives of the different traditions and how they look at loneliness. Did you get a chance
I
to kind
did.
of see it?
Like read, like you mean like the Carl Jung and the other
Yeah, yeah,
thoughts?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I went through and I looked at Buddhism, Stoicism, Taoism, Christianity, New Age, psychology, existentialism,
Mm-hmm.
and each system's thoughts on loneliness or solitude. And I thought it was interesting that there's this line that kind of like a through line through all of them, which is
And what's the common thread? What is it?
the through line is that the separation is needed, right? Or the separation is there for an awakening or for you a stimuli, a trigger, as we said previously.
Okay.
And I think there's a slight tweak to every kind of tradition and the way that they see it. But they're all very, very similar in the sense of that it's a signal for you, right? I think for here, let me just kind of go through the different ones. Like Buddhism, loneliness arises from attachment and the illusion of separation. So loneliness becomes a doorway to deeper presence, self acceptance, and connection with all beings.
Mm-hmm.
And then Stoicism, their core view is that loneliness happens when we resist the natural flow. Oh, no, that's Taoism. Sorry.
That.
Stoicism, core view is loneliness is a judgment, not an objective condition. So
Yeah. Got
solitude
it.
is an opportunity to practice virtues, clarity, and self mastery.
Mm-hmm.
Taoism, loneliness happens when we resist the natural flow, and solitude is a return to your true nature.
Okay.
Christianity, that human beings are designed for connection with God and with one another. Loneliness is an invitation to spiritual intimacy and community support. Because, God is always with us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like when you go into solitude, you're walking kind of with God,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
For New Age or modern spirituality, loneliness signals a misalignment between the soul and itself.
Okay.
So loneliness is a transitional space, a cocoon before transformation.
Okay.
And then psychology, loneliness is a subjective emotional state, not simply being alone. Loneliness is a biological signal like hunger to seek healthy connections.
Okay.
And then lastly, in existentialism, loneliness is part of the human condition. Loneliness is the path to self-awareness and personal meaning.
So
you see the through line, right?
no, I agree. So I was gonna say what I'm hearing, and actually knowing multiple of those traditions is. So I think we've defined in other podcasts that the only way to know yourself is doing the self discovery work and getting to know who you are.
Yeah.
But to do that, you have to be like you have to do it on your. You have to be alone. You can't do it with people. You can't. You got to be alone. And if we go by the fact that there is an universal consciousness, right, and all traditions believe in something like that, then the only way to get that connection or to get to listen to what that is trying to tell you is to be alone, to be lonely, and not to be lonely, to be alone, and to go into yourself. To go into yourself. Let's call it that.
Solitude.
Which is solitude. But the loneliness is what tells you that you need to do that. That's the and it's funny because we were talking in the other part, that's exactly what we're landing on. Is
Maybe
loneliness drives you. It's loneliness to me is the trigger that tells you, hey, you need to do the work on your own, do the self-discovery, which is solitude, to get there.
I see maybe loneliness is the feeling and then solitude is the action.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the loneliness is a feeling that triggers you, and solitude is the action of, processing things, reflection, introspection. And then I don't know.
Okay, can I ask you a very, very personal question?
Sure.
Since you started doing your spiritual work and your practices, do you feel alone when you're on your own?
Sometimes. I mean, so recently, because of Naveem and everything, I wanted to really understand like the different spiritual traditions. And I almost feel like I'm going through like a secondary spiritual like identity crisis because my first one was when I was younger, what I talked about when I was going to church and I was baptized Christian and I had to find my identity in my Christianity. And now that I'm kind of going through the different and trying to learn different spiritual traditions, I'm almost back at that point again where I'm like trying to think about like, what do I believe, And that has caused me at some times to feel alone in the sense that I don't really know. And I think when you're confident in like knowing what you believe in, you don't feel as disconnected from yourself, right? So I do feel alone at times, but then I also don't feel alone at the same time because there's so much information and connection that's possible, right? That I'm learning about that I know that I'm just on this path, on this journey to getting to that place, but I just have to continue to walk it.
Yeah. That's I hear you. And so the reason I asked you that question is because I since I went through all those process of loneliness, solitude, and spiritual process and all stuff, since then, especially now where I am now, I don't feel alone, right? So if I'm by myself, like say I end up being by myself, whatever, I'm alone. I don't feel alone. but I miss the people. Like I miss my people, right? Let's say so if the kids go on vacation, something happens that I'm the only person, or I don't feel alone, but I do miss them, right? Like I
Yeah.
can identify, like I can feel its difference between what I used to feel back in the day, which is a feeling of aloneness. Like if somebody were left or anything like that, I would feel alone. Whereas now I miss them,
But
but
I
I
feel
don't
like,
feel alone. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel alone, but I do miss my
yeah,
family or just friends,
I get
whatever.
what you're saying, but I think loneliness is disconnected, not missing somebody. I think missing
Ah,
someone
good point.
is very different than feeling disconnected from somebody.
That's true.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um,
Which explains why somebody could be lonely in a marriage because
yeah,
they're
exactly.
disconnected. Yeah. No, that
Correct.
makes sense. That
Or
makes
like
sense.
lonely in a room full of relatives or whatever during Christmas or
Or
Thanksgiving, right?
Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Like I really feel like the disconnection is, at least for me, it's no one understands me or what I'm going through. That's the initial thought, is like just no
Yeah.
one gets it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you think that that's a perspective that you have, there's automatically space between you and everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think the work, walking on the path, is getting that space and reducing it. So,
That is the hardest part. I gotta say, it is the hardest part to take the space and reduce it. Because eventually we gotta get to union where we realize we're all together, like we're all one. But sometimes
I
it's
mean,
so hard,
that's,
especially over the holidays. It is very hard to get to that point when you're sitting on a table and you can't connect to anybody on that table. It is hard.
well,
It is hard.
I think, yeah, I mean, for sure. I don't know how else to say it, in the sense of, when you feel separated from people, um, and you feel that like the kind of the world is against you, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all on you, right? It's hard to kind of get out of it. But the reality is that the only person that could get you out of that is you. There's nobody.
Yeah.
And your connection to a higher power,
Mm-hmm.
potentially. But but that's the internal work, right? There's no outside person, just like thing that's going to material thing that's going to take that away from you.
Right.
And I think that's really hard to face. And also, like, when people say do the work, it's like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you
Well,
mean?
what kind of work? Exactly. So do the work. What kind of work? What do you mean by do the work? Like, what kind of work are we talking about? For the record, we're saying the spiritual work, like the work of self discovery, the work of
I mean, I
getting to
think
yourself.
it could be different from everybody, and I think everybody needs different support as they're going through the work. So some might need, like, hey, I'm going to go see a therapist, and have them ask me probing questions about where I am and what I'm feeling,
Right.
to get me to realize myself, because we all know therapists they don't tell you answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, um where I am, what I need to work on. Or other people just need like really good friends that they can talk to, that ask, help you with probing questions.
Yeah.
um for me, I start with, why do I feel like crap?
No, but okay, but that's a great starting. But like, why? Like probing the feeling. Like, what do I feel? Like, I guess if you step, not you step, but part of the work is understanding your emotions and working to your emotions and identifying things that why you react or you behave a particular way. So asking that question, I think, is the perfect first step. Like, why do I feel
Yeah,
like what am I feeling?
I think any emotion that we feel, whether that is sad, mad, scared, whatever, is a a window into like what's behind that window.
Yeah.
Why am I mad? Why am I sad? Why do I feel disconnected? Asking these things and trying to peel away the layers of it all, because it is layers of it.
Yeah.
And like our lives can get very complicated. So
Yeah.
if I'm sitting at a table with my family, let's say, and I feel very disconnected with my family, the question is why,
Mm-hmm.
right? So why do I feel disconnected to my parents, right? Like,
Right.
why do I feel like they don't understand me? Why is that? And it can go into like, well, I don't have the relationship that I feel like I should have with them. And then your brain can ask you like, well, where is the expectation of that relationship coming from? So
Mm-hmm.
what is that expected? Like how close do you want to be with your parents really? Oh, I want to be really close. Okay, well, why do you want to be really close with them? Is that programmed into you because of what you see in social media and in on TV, or is that something that you truly truly want? You have to ask these questions. Some people might be like, actually, I don't need, like, I'm a grown adult now, I don't necessarily need, you know to be very close with my parents. Others could be like, well, I need to be very close with my parents because I need to know where I came from, because knowing where you came from, you know where you're going, right? So
Yeah.
it really depends on the person's perspective. But I think diving into those things and trying to understand, like, why do I feel this way, and then challenging like your expectations a little bit. One,
Mm-hmm.
asking like, well, why do I expect it this way? And is that true for, do I truly, is that expectation truly serving me and what I want from my life? And if that expectation isn't, then I think you can toss it.
That's good. So, loneliness triggers or gives you the hint. You do some work, you figure out those emotions, you dig deep and figure that out, and then you move on and do it again and do it again until is there a stop, or is it just a recursive process that we got to go through? Is this something that just is part of our path as we move
Yeah, I
forward?
think it's part of living as human beings, right? Like, we're very complicated spiritual beings, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if we're always evolving and our perspective changes and our feelings definitely change. And so I think this is just a process that we go through in life.
Okay, I agree.
And for some, they might even say that this is the process of like purifying your feelings to get on the road of enlightenment. I don't know. Like some traditions say that. So I can only speak to my own experiences in the sense of that I feel like it's, I'm going to use a Christian term, but an
Mm-hmm.
edification
Yeah.
that you go through in your life where you're editing and getting hopefully to a better place and a deeper understanding of who you are.
Now, are they like so? So I do meditation. You're doing Tao Chi. You're doing Tao now. Do you find, besides the asking of the questions and why, what's underneath this, how am I going to work this, do you find doing some of the practices helps in that process?
So I'm learning about Taoism now and I'm doing
Mm.
Tai Chi. And I think the physical form of Tai Chi is a physical representation of Taoism itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if it's giving me a deeper understanding of Taoism itself, but it does give me uh, an understanding of balance
Yeah,
and
yeah.
circular motion
Mm-hmm.
when I'm doing Tai Chi. So it does remind me of kind of like the very like broad rooted basics of the belief system.
Okay. So for me, meditation, though, like it does, like keeping that process does help when those, if and when, especially when I did have that whole loneliness period, it did help
Mm-hmm.
because it helps bring that out. So what are we? The one aspect that we haven't talked about, and it's one that I do want to talk about, is the social media influence on all
Yeah.
of this. How
Mm-hmm.
is that? Do you think that's increasing that social media is detrimental to the feeling of loneliness, or is increasing the feeling of loneliness? Like, where do you feel is the social media role in the whole feeling of loneliness, especially over the holidays?
I mean, I feel like social media tricks you into thinking that you have connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're seeing people on your phone, on your screens all the time. So there's this like illusion of connection. But in reality, it doesn't go very deep, right? It's very surface and so it doesn't, I don't necessarily think that it fuels your soul, the connection that you're truly wanting. So I think it's almost like akin to like if you really want sugar, if your body really wants sugar and then you give it like corn syrup, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
like
yeah.
so you it kind of tastes sweet but your body can't register it as sugar, so it
Yeah.
constantly needs more and more of it, but
Mm-hmm.
it just never hits the spot.
Right.
I think social media is like that. I mean, I don't, that's coming from, you know, a Gen Xer, right? Like, I don't know how your girls or the younger generation feel about, you know, social media. Do you feel like that social media can prevent that like young adulthood loneliness? Or do you think that it can exacerbate it, like make it worse?
I think for what I'll call Gen Zs, and I'm making a very broad statement, but Gen Zs, for them is huge. I think for them, social
Huge in what way?
media,
Like it makes it more lonely or less
it
lonely?
makes it more lonely. I feel the illusion of connectiveness in social media makes it worse for that generation when they get those feelings of loneliness, or when they realize it's all fake. That I
Mm.
think it's worse for that generation in particular. Interesting enough, the generation after, the younger ones, I don't see it as much. For our
Gen Alpha.
generation, yeah, for our generation, I don't. I mean, I think Gen X is above, we're just survivors, but I think millennials also went to the. I don't think they're so effective, but I think the Gen Zs are really, they do believe it is a true, like an online social connection is a true connection. They do feel that, and then when that breaks or that doesn't happen, or it's like a huge shock to the system.
Mm, mm.
Um, so the reason I ask the question is because I'm like, I keep thinking, I'm like, what, social media, again, it was created for something. It's a great tool, but I think it's not used correctly. And how, if you're young, what can we tell you, Gen Zs, or what could we suggest to anybody that's listening to us to say, hey, you should, this is what you should do, right? Like, how do you find a true connection? I guess it's like, how do you move from a social media connection to a true connection?
I mean, I think social media in its infancy was good, right? Like you had, you know, like Facebook and MySpace and all these like dating apps and whatever community building things that assisted people into getting into in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think social media today can also do that. Instagram, like all these different social media platforms can assist you into meeting people on those platforms, but then moving into building out your community in real life. And I think that is the next, like, I think that would be the next step, is to building relationships outside of
Yeah.
just interfacing on your phone.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have, because again, it's not about like having relationships, it's about having deep relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So how can you have deep relationships even with yourself or with other people if you're constantly just like behind your phone? You know, I
Now, how different is that from from real physical life, where you could have a lot of acquaintances, people that you know,
yeah.
but necessarily don't have deep connections with, versus, let's call it, true friendships or true connections, people that you actually do have that connection. So could the, I guess what I'm leaning towards is, could the lessons of real life and things that in our timeline we had to realize, because it was all physical, there was no social media part of it, can those things be applied in social media?
No, I don't see. I was always one that didn't like internet dating, let's say.
Right.
And
Right.
I didn't like it because I didn't like the thought of somebody being able to edit or curate what I saw and what they said.
Yeah.
In real life, when you meet somebody, they can't delete what they said to you.
What you say is out there. Once it's out there, it's out there. Yeah.
And so to me, that just felt more authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that authenticity is what people are looking for. And I think
There you
the
go. There you go.
opportunity for things to be more authentic is always in real life versus online,
Yeah.
because there is no edit or delete button.
Yeah. So I think what we're trying to say, I guess what we're leaning towards and where we're landing is, if you, it doesn't matter where you are, whether it's social media or real life, you may have relationships or connections, or you may or may not feel connected. But at some point, if you feel loneliness, that's a trigger or a sign to say there's something that you need to work on. You're feeling something you need to work on your own, for you. Doors and for you. And once you do that work or start looking into that, and you get to a point of you can make that choice of, I want to choose to do some solitude work, or I want to do that, that in itself gets you in a better position to deal with what we call normal life and human life, where you're going to run into people that are really no friends, or run into situations that are fake or not true connectivity. But as long as you're in that, you develop that muscle, let's call it that muscle of working in, I have a situation, I'm going to work on it. How do it affect me? Why do I feel this way? What's underneath that? Let me do that work. It helps you go through that path. And every single time you're into stuff, you get better and better at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the takeaway is that having feelings isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
And feelings aren't bad in themselves. And I think feelings in general are a trigger for you to go in and ask yourself the questions of why.
Yeah.
And I think doing that work of asking yourself the questions of why helps you build a stronger connection to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And thereafter, when you have a stronger awareness of who you are and why you feel a certain way, you can build stronger relationships with other people, because you have a level of understanding of yourself that almost in turn builds a level of empathy for others, right? Because you kind of understand why you feel the feelings that you do. And when that happens, I think loneliness kind of subsides into solitude, because when you have a real deep connection with yourself, you can never really truly feel alone anymore. and so it turns into solitude, and then solitude becomes this recurring work that is done as you're interfacing with the external world.
That's it.
So
I think that's it. I agree. So, Gene, the big spiritual takeaway from today is that loneliness doesn't have to be a destination. It's really just a signal guiding us toward conscious withdrawal.
totally. And everyone listening, don't be afraid to just try 15 minutes of intentional quiet time this week. When you sit there, ask yourself, what part of myself am I avoiding when I'm reaching for my phone? That's the real challenge. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Naveem Connect.
Please join us for our next episode next month, where we're going to be tackling a massive subject: the soul's true origin. That's going to be a deep dive you don't want to miss. Until then, stay connected, stay kind.